And it's sad, it's troubling if you've ever been in the situation, of course, despairing. You know that you're going to see someone for the last time. It's different being surprised when someone's dying, but this time I knew I'm seeing her for the last time. When I walk out this room, it's the last time I get to lay eyes on her this side of heaven. And it's just a lot of weight to that. And knowing, pretty much beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was a vaccine that did that, and like it didn't have to be that way.
Well, welcome to another exciting episode of TFVC Shot Callers. I am TFVC President Rebecca Hardy, and my guest is a personal friend of mine and also amazing medical provider, Dr. Michael Turner, MD. Welcome to the show, Dr. Turner.
Yeah, thank you. Really glad to be here, Rebecca. It's a pleasure. Glad we could connect to do this. Been looking forward to it.
Yes, me too. And let's just give our listeners a little bit of background. I had been connected with you from another interview that I had done with somebody, and I had called up this person. I said, hey, I'm having this little medical issue. Do you have a referral for me? And he connected us together. And so for several months, I've been a patient of yours. And then it wasn't until fast forward to this past November where I am an exhibitor at this doctor convention in Bandera, Texas. And during one of the presentations, all about censorship and how these doctors across the nation have been silenced, this doctor during her PowerPoint had your picture up in her presentation. I was thinking, oh, I'm a patient of somebody famous here. If you're being censored, you're famous. So anyway, I just wanted to, it wasn't until that conference where I really realized how much on the front lines of the COVID tyranny you've been on. So thank you. With that, I will just read your bio right quick and then we'll launch in. So you are a graduate of Stanford University, Harvard Medical School, and the Mayo Clinic. You're an integrative medicine physician and a CEO of your own national concierge practice. You have been called genuine, caring, and the best doctor in the world by patients. I would just like to add my 2 cents of agreement to that. You bring a high degree of empathy, optimism, and holistic approach to your patient care. I'm going to just embellish your bio just a little bit because I would add a little bit of humor to that as well. We have a lot of fun on our telehealth medicine appointments. You've developed a personalized, integrated approach to help people become the healthiest versions of themselves. And I completely agree with the statement that you bring passion and excellence and really do provide a model of healthy living. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's very kind. I love what I do. I come to work enthusiastic every day, as I'm sure you do as well. And,
Yes.
I see this as God's calling on my life. I look at it like my healthcare ministry really is what it is, not just a job. I mean, if somebody independently wrote me a big check tomorrow, I'd still show up the next day to be Dr. Turner because it's the healthcare ministry that God's given me, And so my job is to bring my best effort, my wisdom, my learning, the conferences I go to, the people I meet, all that, all the best experiences in one place, deliver it to people to help uplift them. And, now needed more than ever in many senses because of what's going on. So I'm glad to do it and joining alongside many, many other people of goodwill, all working together in their own sphere of influence.
I love that so much. Okay, let's dive in. So my first question is somewhat open-ended and is inspired by the very thoughtful journey or thoughtful blog, I guess I should say, that you wrote called Losing My Vaccine Religion. So why don't we start with you walking our listeners through your journey of being a physician during COVID?
Certainly. Well, it started just prior to COVID. So I'd been working at a neuroscience center here in my town in Washington State for about 12 years and was getting a little dissatisfied with the way the medical practice was structured. And I had such desires towards integrative medicine and a holistic approach that I basically outgrew my job description. And so I realized, I need to go in business for myself. I don't want to be one of those persons living with regret at the end of my career, just thinking about coulda, woulda, shoulda. I'm like, nah, I refuse to be that person. So I'm going to start my own practice. And, that goes countercultural. It's swimming against the current to a large degree. But I just knew deep within my soul that's what had to be done. So I launched Michael Turner, MD in January of 2020. All right. So then, bam, coincidental timing. Shortly after that, right, we're getting all this news about lockdowns and flattening the curve and masks and all this stuff. So pretty quickly, patients were coming to me with questions like, how do I prevent COVID? I'm pretty concerned. I'm pretty scared. How do I prevent getting sick? Oh, grandma got sick. What do we do for her? They said she went to the ER, urgent care a couple times. They said there's really nothing that can be done. Just try to keep her SATs up, take some Tylenol, but I'm pretty sure there's more that we should be doing, right? And then it progressed, then someone said, hey, have you heard about ivermectin? I said, well, way back in med school, we studied that a little bit, as a parasite medicine, as a tropical medicine. I've not really heard about it since then. They're like, well, they're talking about as far as COVID. Have you heard of Dr. Corey, FLCCC? There's this viral video that's breaking the internet on YouTube, et cetera. So I looked that up, started utilizing FLCCC protocols, and started providing those to patients with phenomenal success, and seeing stories of people getting sick, people, smuggling medicine into hospitals and getting loved ones off of their deathbed and out of the hospital, right? All of this was happening. It was very dramatic at times. So I became a frontline COVID doctor, essentially, and I was well positioned to do so, being in business for myself, being able to think independently, creatively, and also in an integrative manner, right? So it was not even just about ivermectin. It was always about talking about healthy immune system and sleep and, stress and positive attitude and the quality of your relationships and all these things that factor into the whole mind-body integrated experience that we live in as human beings, right? So that was all humming along. I started to get a little bit of, we'll say persecution on the part of my state medical board, which we can get into that a little bit later. But I nevertheless, was persisting and helping patients. So that was the first part of it. And the second part really was the vaccine journey. So that came about a year later, as you know, right? So 2020 COVID, 2021 was the year of the vaccine. And when the vaccine came out initially, I would describe my attitude as cautiously optimistic. That would be a fair phrase. I was cautiously optimistic. My thought was, I will welcome anything that would help us get out of this problem. I will welcome anything that might help actually prevent or treat COVID. If it's ivermectin, if it's making blueberry superfood smoothies, right? If it's infrared sauna, if it is some fancy new piece of technology shot, I don't have a predisposition to deny anything that could possibly help my patient. So that was my viewpoint. And I figured there were a lot of smart people who spent a lot of time working on this, and a lot of money was spent on this. And so I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and be cautiously optimistic that this might help certain people. And so as it rolled out, I was open to it and actually got my 2 Pfizers, not because I had to, but because I wanted to initially. And my thought process was, first of all, I don't want to be infectious to patients if I can avoid that. I had obviously many vaccines going through medical school. So the idea of getting a vaccine was really no big consequence to me. And then further, I thought, I don't want to lose time off of work, right? Like, I can't afford to be down a week or two just on my sick bed, dry heaving and having bone aches and, muscle pain and, brain fog. I'm a physician and people are depending on me to be strong, right? So I can't get into, well, maybe I need to be on short-term disability because this COVID thing or whatever. So anything that might prevent it, I'm all on board. So all of my healthy habits continued, but of course, I thought the vaccine might also be a helpful part of that prevention. So I got my 2 Pfizers. And then a little bit into that, again, through a patient, which it's astounding. You learn some of the most insightful and really even trajectory-changing insights oftentimes come from patients. And so this one came from a patient, just like the ivermectin and Dr. Corey. This patient said, they're talking about these vaccines and they're saying these things might not be great. Like, okay, well, who's saying that? I'm open. Let's have a conversation about it, right? I'm not going to, bite your head off or anything. Tell me, what's the scoop? He's like, have you heard about this guy, Dr. Malone? He was part of creating the mRNA vaccines. He's coming out kind of strongly against them. Like, no, I never heard of this guy. Well, I think you should know it. Sure, send me the information. So he sends me stuff about Dr. Malone. Pretty soon I'm reading that. One thing leads to another. And then, as 2021 wore on, as I dove into Dr. Malone and others, and we can go into my journey a little bit further, I started to sour on the whole concept of the vaccines, culminating really in going to the vaccine march in Washington. And that was about a year later. I'm estimating, I think, January, February 22, something like that. So I was at the march in Washington. I'm standing at Lincoln Memorial. RFK is up there. Malone, Steve Kerr, Corey, all the heavyweights, all the names. I'm standing right in front. I mean, I could have thrown a rock and hit the podium, right? And I'm just kind of overawed. I'm like, this is like me being at MLK. I have a dream. This is my moment. I can't believe I'm here. This is amazing. Fantastic people. And as soon as that rally ended, I go, that's it. I am coming out strong, anti-vaccine. I'm putting together all this stream of thought that's been percolating for the last year, and I'm going to articulate it. And that became my signature piece, if you will, Losing My Vaccine Religion, that Substack article, which by the grace of God, I put a lot of work into it, but it's been viewed over probably 150,000 times. It ended up being publicized to the point that I was invited to be on Del Bigtree. We did an episode about it. You may have seen that. I got, through this, invited to talk to Mickey Willis. I got interviewed to be in Plandemic 3, et cetera, et cetera. So some great publicity came out of that, and I've heard and hope that it's helped to change a lot of minds on the matter. And I'll just end by saying, particularly on that piece, my goal was to, describe my own journey with the vaccine, but also to be persuasive, to be considerate, right? To not be bombastic, so that this is something that you could share, for example, with someone still taking his or her own journey, right? A family member, a coworker, etc. It was meant to be respectful and to really further a dialogue. That was the point. And so I hope that, it might have gone out into cyberspace and achieved some of the aims that I had for it. Yeah.
Well, I was reviewing that blog to prepare for this interview, and I will just say, it is impeccably cited and sourced, and you achieved exactly what you set out to do, a thoughtful, well-cited, but yet palatable Substack where, anybody can read it and walk through it. And I particularly like the way you phrase, the plot twist. You entered this pandemic with being, to use your own words, like hopeful and, somewhat optimistic about the vaccine rollout. And you rolled up your sleeves, you got them. And then, the eyes started, you just started waking up. I don't want to say you were waking up, because you are obviously a very thoughtful provider, but your eyes were open to maybe some of the corruption. And in your blog, I love the way you use the term plot twist when you're laying out some of your concerns. So can you unpack a few of those for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, that was quite consequential. The first plot twist I mentioned in the vaccine piece is that vaccinated people turned out to be just as infectious as unvaccinated ones. And so if you remember, this was obviously quite a big push. It's like, hey, you need to get vaccinated, if nothing else, because you need to be considerate of grandma and the lady at the grocery store. And it's poor citizenship, and it's rude and it's uncaring that you would not get vaccinated because you're becoming typhoid Mary, in your community, and that's just not acceptable, right? So there's a strong moral argument that was phrased in that sense. But when we actually kind of get into the data of it a little bit more and look at that, vaccinated people turn out to be just as infectious. It did not keep you from passing on COVID. And there's probably many studies, but the first one that hit me pretty hard was done out of the UK. And they followed households for a year, basically. And they had households where one person was vaccinated, and then when nobody was vaccinated, and they looked at the rates of people developing COVID over that next year, and they did the math, et cetera. And basically, the rates were unchanged. There was no difference. If you went to somebody in an unvaccinated household and said, hey, you all should get the vaccine so that at least you don't pass it on to, grandma or something who's living with you guys, that would be, dangerous and inconsiderate and foolhardy. There's no such argument. So that was quite compelling on my mind. And I didn't really hear that, in the media, right? Like there was all this push for the aforementioned reasons, but there was none of this retraction like, oh, wait, upon further investigation, this actually doesn't keep you from being infectious. So that was disingenuous on their part. I would say one of the other huge plot twists that everybody needs to understand, and I still encounter people who don't quite understand this, is the spike protein, right? The spike protein. So as I was reading about the COVID virus itself, and you start to learn how does the virus enter your cell and how does it cause problems, and it all revolves around this spike protein, this so-called spike protein, right? And so I was reading all these scientific articles in PubMed about how terrible the COVID virus spike protein is, and all the nasty things it can do, such as promote blood clotting and promote inflammation and, affect nerve health and cardiovascular health and, degrade your mitochondria and all these terrible things. And I go, all right, well, the vaccine tells our cells to turn into spike protein producing factories, essentially. The mRNA, as you know, is a little bit of instructional code that tells them to start pumping out spike protein left, right, and center. So the $1,000,000 question is that the same spike protein? And every terrible thing that I'm reading about the COVID virus spike protein, can the COVID mRNA injection spike protein do all of that or less or more? Like, how does this compare, right? And again, if you go online, YouTube, there are some pretty eminent people, I won't mention names, but some PhDs with large social media followings fielding that question, and they kind of hem and hawed, and they didn't get really clear with people on it. But when you dig into it, yes, my friends, it's the same in all important aspects. You could even argue that it's worse. It's worse because the mRNA persists in your body for a long time. So the exposure from the spike protein that you would get from just an infection, your body's going to work through that in maybe 7 days, right? mRNA has been genetically engineered to persist for a long time. It's going to be spewing out spike protein for, we don't even know exactly how long, but it's months. Let's just say it's not 7 days as maybe a native COVID infection. And yes, it is the same spike protein. It can be, and Robert Malone wrote an article on this in Substack that was like very clear. He kind of laid all the science down. So that right there is a bombshell. As soon as we, I could give the vaccine makers some benefit of the doubt and say, well, we picked the wrong target for the vaccine. We thought the spike protein was inert. Maybe it was just the way the virus entered your cells. Turns out it's terrible and causes all this damage. And now that we know that, we picked the wrong mRNA strand to put into people. But there should have been a giant mea culpa at that point, and they should have been immediately withdrawn from the market because we knew that the spike protein is a nasty actor. But again, that was covered up, not talked about. These things, of course, weren't withdrawn. Yeah, it is the same spike protein, and it's worse. You get a higher spike protein burden, and it actually travels to more places, right? Because that's another little plot twist. They kept telling us that the vaccine just stays in your shoulder. And I was like, all right. Well, and then it's always like some leaked piece of information too. This is what I hate, right? And then it's like, oh, some leaked Pfizer data from Japan on the animal studies showed that really the mRNA, because of the lipid nanoparticles, was traveling all over the place. And they had little immunofluorescence, and so then you sacrifice the animals, and this lights up, and you can see what parts are lit up after they give them the shot. Well, they were lighting up in there, including ovaries, adrenals, testicles, brain, heart, all these places. But again, this had to be leaked from some Japanese data. I'm like, why should it be this hard? Oh my gosh, So this, so that was based on a false idea. It doesn't just stay in your arm. It goes all over the place. And then, of course, now we have autopsies that shown that. A lot of doctors, I think Dr. Burkholz is one of them, but out of Germany, they published autopsies. Person dies of a vaccine injury. You can stain for spike protein, and you can see it's all over the place. It didn't just stay in the person's deltoid. Those lipid nanoparticles go everywhere. They weasel their way into cells. That's what they're designed to do. It becomes widespread. So when you get a virus infection, you have, the virus hanging out in your upper respiratory tract. You get a little bit of local spike protein. When you get it in your deltoid, it immediately travels systemically. It could be in your brain, could be in your heart muscle, could be in your adrenal glands, et cetera, et cetera. So the distribution and the structure of it, those are some big plot twists.
Can you speak specifically about the reproductive health plot twist?
Yes, sure. So Naomi Wolf has published the most about this as far as I'm aware, and then also James Thorpe, I believe he's out of Texas as well. He's an OBGYN, yes. So the spike protein can get down into the reproductive organs, whether testicles or ovaries, and along with the lipid nanoparticles, which have some of their own little toxic problems, drastically affect the health of those organs. And this is known. So, for example, one of the polyethylene glycol, one of the main products in the lipid nanoparticles, was known to be a, quote, potential toxicity risk, okay, unquote, to women's ovaries. And so, fair enough. Potential doesn't mean definite, but at least gives cause for concern, right? So that was a little concerning when I found that out. And then pretty much shortly afterwards, again, coming out of Britain, there was a big survey in which 30,000 women reported menstrual changes after receiving the vaccine, right? So again, cause for concern. I'm not thinking 30,000 women are just making that up or, highly, misdirected or misled somehow on their menstrual cycle. Like they got the vaccine and pretty much things changed, shortly thereafter. And again, is there a mechanism to do so? Yes, we know that these things can travel to the ovaries. Yes, we know that they cause inflammation. And when it triggers, your own body's immune system, it's basically attacking the spike protein and everything around it, including your own native organ tissue. And then there were a couple papers that came out, including the fact that sperm production falls off after the vaccine. And then a lot of, again, like the leaked document concept, a lot of what Naomi Wolf has published about, right, where all the stuff that Pfizer wanted 75 years to finally turn over, they forced them to in court, they turned it over, you go through that with a fine-tooth comb, and you start finding all kinds of problems, including, spontaneous abortions and fetal abnormalities and terrible stuff that was reported and well-known and a part of Pfizer's data just wasn't brought to light. I don't know quite how they got away with that. And then there's some studies about how it can be present in breast milk for a period of time afterwards. So we know it gets in the ovaries and testicles. We know it knocks down their function, thus causing hormonal changes, menstrual irregularities, and even all the way out to maternal fetal transmission and even spontaneous abortions and problems such as that.
All right. Anything else on the plot twist that you want to relay?
I'd say, the last plot twist I think was quite interesting, kind of eye-opening. And this took it beyond just the vaccine. This took it into the corruption, right? And how that kind of needs to be addressed is this whole idea of informed consent with the vaccine, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about that. It's a pillar of medical ethics. It's the right of every patient to informed consent, meaning pros, cons, risk-benefit analysis that needs to be individualized, and you need to have that information presented to you. And so, of course, if you buy any prescription med, there's your little pill bottle, and then there's this white, thick, origami-looking thing that folds out, and it's got all these pages, and it's all the legal fine print, right? And that's part of your informed consent. Ideally, the pharmacist and the doctor have said something to you verbally, but that's their risk mitigation move that all the legal people take, is at least you had the fine print in the handout, and you should have read it, ma'am. Okay. Well, here's what's interesting. And again, I've never seen this in medicine. I was shocked when the patient told me, he's like, yeah, I asked for the little white handout that I have for all my other pills when I went to the pharmacy, and the guy stonewalled and stuff, and then he just gave it to me, and it was blank. It was a big white blank piece of paper. I said, no way, that's against the law. It's against the law. They can't just hand you a blank white. He's like, yeah, it's blank. He goes, I'll send you a picture. He took pictures, sent it to me on a cell phone. I could not believe it. Renata Moon, who I think you saw, she was famous for going to a congressional inquiry and holding up the blank so-called, informed consent risk benefits that they actually don't even give out. They just have it in the back of the pharmacy, because why would you give something blank? It just puts egg on everyone's face and it makes an awkward discussion. And I was like, no, this isn't real. What? This is impossible, right? So then when I look at it and I dig in, like, how do they get away with this? If you go on the website, you look around, they say some things like, well, because of the rapidly changing, information and stuff, we want to just keep the most up-to-date thing here on the website. So we just direct people to just come here online and read about it. And then if you try to actually go to Moderna or these places and read, it's buried way back on the website somewhere. And I was like, isn't that just convenient? Because grandma is really going to go to your website and dig around all these places to finally get to this thing that she should have just been handed to you. She probably wouldn't have even read that way, but at least she had the obvious, easy route to do that. So they're kind of, hiding behind this fake posturing of it's more up to date when we're hiding it somewhere online that way. It was just so much baloney. So anyway, I took a picture of the blank vaccine insert that my patient had texted me, and I published it in the article for everyone to see. Kind of interesting. So that was something else.
Yes. And I had Dr. Moon's episode aired a couple of weeks ago, and we inserted the footage from that congressional hearing into it. And yeah, you can see, and I just love it because she even bonks the microphone a little bit while she's unfolding, because it's this completely unwieldy paper. And it's just, how many times do you have to unfold just to see that it is blank? And it is just a huge miscarriage of informed consent, 100%.
Absolutely. And this is why it must not be allowed. It can't just be swept under the rug, right? Because it's broader than just the vaccine. They basically undercut doctor-patient relationship, trust, and medical ethics. And if it's not this, it could be something else tomorrow. It doesn't matter what the it is, but we always need to preserve and fight for informed consent. It's a major violation. It's kind of like a human rights violation if you want to put it in those terms, but
100%.
it's not okay. Yeah.
It's not okay. So, and I love the way you asked this in your blog. You said, if they're so safe, why do the vaccine manufacturers need this total legal immunity from any potential harms? And I just want to remind our listeners that a legal shield of protection applies to every single vaccine on the childhood schedule and any vaccines that are authorized under that emergency use authorization, that EUA. There is no liability for these vaccine manufacturers. But again, you ask a very simple question. If they're so safe and so effective, why do they need this legal protection?
True. It's a great point. And it was a question that actually, I think it was RFK raised at the vaccine rally. I remember that. I didn't come up with that question, but it hit home for me. And it's like, right, great point. Why do they? So yeah.
Well, and we are a nation somewhat obsessed with consumer protections. I mean, I can't think of a single product that is essentially mandated across the board. These for-profit companies have, convinced state legislatures across the nation to mandate their for-profit products, but yet they don't have any liability in a nation that we love our consumer protections. And it has never made sense to me why we have a mandated medical procedure. We all know that every medical procedure comes with some risks to some people. It is just such the opposite of informed consent when you are coerced into taking a for-profit product in order to participate in society.
True. Yeah, it goes against much of what we stand for. Absolutely. It's a big problem. The best I understand it as well is that the COVID situation is unique, obviously in the sense in which all these principles were violated in a gross fashion, right? But there's a reason why it's unique. And so this came out a bit from me talking to Dr. Malone when I had him as a guest on my podcast, because he knows a lot about the workings of the government, right? It's not my point of expertise at all. And so the best way I understand it, talking to him and piecing some other things together, is that the government was really the driver of the vaccine. So Moderna was basically a spinoff of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, right? So the idea from the government was, we need to have a bioweapon response. We've got a potential bioweapon threat. Oh, now it's a real threat. It just got released. By the way, we helped fund and develop it because we outsourced it, et cetera. So we caused our own problem, but now we've got to respond to our problem. So, nobody wants to read about this vaccine is manufactured by the Department of Defense, right? It makes you feel like you're in the military or something. It's like, oh God, I don't trust them, right? So they've got to get some actual pharma makers to show up and to push this thing out. I mean, no different than, in my mind, World War II, and they enlisted Henry Ford to start making tanks, right? It's kind of a rough similarity, but this is kind of what the vibe was. So the government basically started Moderna for the most part, and then came to Pfizer and all these other people and said, look, we need to roll this thing out. And they had all the tech. It was all their intellectual property, and really all of their research and everything was, as much as I understood, largely handed to these drug companies to use as fronts to actually deliver the goods to the public. And the drug companies had some of their own reservations. This is, again, I welcome people to fill in the blanks, but this is kind of the best way that I picture the story. The drug companies kind of had some of their own reservations, like, well, this is untested, it's historically unprecedented within medicine, right? Every vaccine requires, typically 10 years in this full process and blah, blah, blah. And the government's like, look, no problem, we'll take care of that. Here's your legal immunity, sign this paper. So this is why everything worked in concert, because it was really coming from the government, right? So you had the FDA acting corrupt. You had legal immunity being handed out to the pharma agencies. You had media totally on talking point and all that, because it was really orchestrated as a national defense bioterrorism response concept, Operation Warp Speed, coming down from the president. It's like Manhattan Project. I mean, it's basically our generation's version of that, in my mind. Now, you can argue perhaps that was legitimate, at least well-intentioned. It was a national bioweapon situation and response, and desperate times call for desperate measures. I'm not saying that was categorically and necessarily bad and evil, but that's why it was so coordinated, and that's why it was so powerful, because again, Big Pharma is powerful, but they're not this powerful, okay? I'm sorry. They're not so powerful to just sweep aside everything in medical ethics, completely control the media, in an instant, completely control all these governments. Follow the money and Big Pharma corruption is a valid narrative that will take you deep into it, but it doesn't explain it all, and it doesn't explain the worldwide aspect of it either, right? Because again, Why in other countries was the same exact thing happening? The media was on talking point. Ivermectin was being demonized. Vaccines were being pushed. I mean, I don't think Pfizer has the same pull in Mexico and Colombia and Ecuador and Thailand and South America as it does in the US. But in all these places, this was going on because all these governments were coordinated, which again gets back into like the WHO and Davos and a bunch of stuff that I'm not really an expert at. But the governments work together to get on point to have this all shake down. And then the story makes the most sense when we view it in those terms. So a little bit of a side tangent, but.
No, I'm here for it. I like that. Let's get a little bit more somber or maybe personal. Where you've talked very honestly about those around you that have been harmed by the COVID jabs. Do you want to? I'm just going to put you on the spot, Dr. Turner. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. So my daughter, lovely daughter. By the way, I have a connection with Texas that's very special and near and dear to my heart. And this is worth mentioning now that I'm here talking with y'all. So we had a child in residency when I was at the Mayo Clinic, and then we decided to adopt children. And we ended up adopting 4 lovely children. They were a sibling group from Texas. They were from the Dallas metro area. Yep. So we flew down to Dallas. We interviewed social services, like took the kids out. I think to Whataburger, had a little play date, the whole thing, got to know them. And so our family went from 1 kid to 5 kids, and we're 4/5 this beautiful group of kids from Texas. And it was one of these beautiful group of kids from Texas, who's actually my oldest child now, who studying to be a nursing student was required to get this vaccine. And all of a sudden she's like, Dad, I'm having trouble with my memory, my concentration. I'm feeling fatigued. She had some autoimmune problems. To a degree anyway, and I just go, oh no, this is a mess. I go, I know what's wrong. I'm really sorry to hear it. I said, no more jabs under no circumstances, or you get any more boosters. I don't care if we have to change careers for you somehow. We'll figure this out, but please don't ever do this again. And this is right around the time when I was hearing all the terrible stuff about women's health and ovaries and menstruation and fertility and such. So that was very concerning. Now, thankfully, she's been able to rebound. She is working hard. She's studying to pass her exams. She graduated from nursing school. She's working on her board exams right now. I think by and large she feels recovered, but it set her back mentally quite a lot. And then my youngest daughter who was not vaccinated, thankfully, was telling me stories, and one of them was just so sad. She's like, Dad, I know this kid in my high school who was a district champion cross country runner. And who was like in his junior year, and then got the vaccine, and senior year he could barely complete a workout. He was having chest pains, right? Going to the ER, they were telling him they couldn't find anything wrong, but all the classic sort of like young male myocarditis, chest pain problems and all that completely tanked his running career. He couldn't come back that entire year. Now, I don't know subsequently if he was able to or what, but it was dramatic, and so it caught my daughter's attention. And then I don't think I put this in the blog, but I have a woman who was basically a mother to me. I was an exchange student overseas, and I lived in the Dominican Republic in high school, and a phenomenal experience. Well, my Dominican host mother, who I stayed in touch with all these years, was in remission from breast cancer and doing very well. And within the family, there was a bit of a debate about, should we get vaccinated, should we not, should mom get it, should she not? And there was kind of a split between, we as the children. And ultimately, there was more of a strong push to get her vaccinated. Well, shortly after she gets vaccinated, the breast cancer came back aggressively, and she was gone in like 4 or 5 months. And I remember I had to fly down to the Dominican Republic. And it's sad, it's troubling if you've ever been in the situation, of course, despairing. You know that you're going to see someone for the last time. It's different being surprised when someone's dying, but this time I knew I'm seeing her for the last time. When I walk out this room, it's the last time I get to lay eyes on her this side of heaven. And it's just a lot of weight to that. And knowing, pretty much beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was a vaccine that did that, and like it didn't have to be that way. Her breast cancer was in remission. We could have had many more years. I could have gone down and hung out with her in the Dominican Republic and just given her a hug and eaten her food and just done all the things, And now it's like last visit, lying in bed, not looking great. And so there was personal sense of loss and anger really with that. Yes.
I am so sorry.
Yeah.
We grieve with you, and I use that as a universal statement to anybody who may be listening that lost someone close to them because of these, the fear-based campaign that was very, very effective for so many that went and lined up for these shots and then suffered the consequences. All right. So tell us a little bit about your experience with censorship and potentially any punitive actions taken by your state medical board.
Sure. So the Washington State Medical Board has been more on the aggressive side to censor and oppose doctors. I would say right up there with maybe California and New York, something like that, unfortunately. So they passed a statement in fall of 2021, which they still abide by and are still actively enforcing. It's their COVID misinformation statement. And it's very interesting. You can find it online. And I actually ended up doing a whole podcast with FLCCC and also with Steve Kirsch's group, Vaccine Safety Research Foundation, all about this. If you're interested more, we go into details. But the COVID misinformation statement basically said, masks are effective, and if you speak against masks, we'll consider that medical malpractice. You will be sanctioned. Vaccines are effective if you speak against them, ditto. And ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are absolutely not effective because the FDA has not approved them. And so if you go spreading ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine around, since they are not FDA approved for such a use, we will come after you. And that's exactly what they've done. They haven't changed their position one iota since fall of 2021. It's as if no new information came out, no new data came out. They don't seem to care. They're still prosecuting healthcare providers and bullying them on the basis of that statement to this very day. And so what happened initially was, after I was prescribing ivermectin, complaints would be filed. And what is fascinating, if you want to use that word, revealing, let's say, would also be a good word. What's revealing is none of the complaints were actually from my patients or the patient's immediate family, because those people all got better and they were all perfectly happy, right? The complaint in one case was from an ER doctor where the patient came in, I think it might have even been for unrelated reason, and they noted on their med sheet, ivermectin. Oh, where'd you get that? Oh, Dr. Turner, da, ba, 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 ba. And the ER doc's like, oh, well, that's against Washington State code, So then, report got sent off. In another case, I think probably the most galling was somebody's granddaughter who didn't even live in the same state, heard that her grandma got ivermectin from, apparently this unscrupulous, uneducated physician who's preying on old people, selling them horse medicine and charging them money for it. This is terrible. Somebody please stop him. Made this referral out to Washington State and got on my case for that. So these letters would start to roll in saying, you're under investigation for patient so-and-so and so-and-so, like, please send us all your records. And then what was interesting is they turned it into kind of a big fishing expedition as well. They're like, oh, well, what about this and what about that? And so just the tentacles of the whole thing would just keep mushrooming. Meanwhile, I'd send them all these records. I'd answer all these questions. They would never reply back, never. And then a fresh complaint would just come in. Oh, we heard about this. Please send us all these records. And then all the questions and all the mushrooming and the same thing. And finally, at one point, we just said, we're done with this. Like, we're consolidating this. We're not going to talk to you anymore. It's time to go to court, I guess. I don't know. You haven't even ruled on the original complaint that we answered over a year and a half ago, right? And so things sort of got consolidated. They're winding their way through court. I actually have my hearing set up next month. Many doctors have gone before me in this, including Dr. Cole, Ryan Cole, who's very famous, in our circles. And what ends up happening is they end up fining you, and they basically typically end up saying you can't prescribe ivermectin for other than FDA-approved uses for a given period of time. And it depends on how long they're going to say that. Now, it's almost a foregone conclusion. I'm hoping that their group, might see the light somehow. I mean, we're going to argue. We're going to be persuasive. We actually have Dr. Corey to be our expert witness, and the truth is clearly on our side. But it's likely they're going to sort of rubber stamp some kind of sanction to me about this. So we're trying to figure that out, try to work around this. But meanwhile, I'll just tell this. There's a positive side to this, okay? I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to say the positive side. But my one thing real quick is this is a very important fight, very, very important, first of all, for patients, because we're trying to preserve access to these meds, right? And so if if we allow ourselves to be sufficiently bullied and kowtowed and just to cave at the first letter or two that we get and not to fight back legally, then we're shutting off the supply line for patients. We're not standing by them in their time of need, doing what our conscience tells us and knows is actually correct, right? So that's the first problem. But the second problem is if they're allowed to get away with saying, well, ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are terrible because they're not FDA approved for this reason, they're setting a precedent, which is that the FDA is the only arbiter of what can and can't be used and when it should be used, which is not their role. And they've even admitted that in court, as you may know from some of the cases. It's just completely out of line. It's just a politician from Washington State grasping at a straw, invoking the FDA to make a decision. It's just all convoluted, and it's got big holes in it. So we can't allow that to stand because, again, what would it be tomorrow? Oh, you can't do that because the FDA didn't say so. Well, the FDA doesn't know you as the patient and doesn't know the medical information that I know in my head to give you good care. Like, they don't really have much to do with this interaction right now, honestly. Their job is to talk to the drug companies and make sure the data and stuff's coming out is actually legitimate, and then let it on the market. But as far as practice of medicine, it's not their mandate, it's not their authority. They don't know what they're doing there. So that's on principle, it's a big issue. It's beyond ivermectin, it's beyond COVID. It's about, can the governments get away with making such statements? And can the pharmacies getting away with denying prescriptions to people? Again, this had never been seen before. All of a sudden, they got bigger than their britches. Like, well, we're just not going to fill the prescription for ivermectin. It's like, no, we can't allow that because, again, what would happen next month and next year? It's just not acceptable.
I am still seeing tweets where doctors are saying, my prescription for XYZ was just denied at this CVS or at this, it's just, it's still happening to this day.
It's still happening to this day. It is. Yes, it is. And so we have to raise a stink about that on different levels. Legal, patient to pharmacist, making a stink in the lobby, writing a letter. I don't know. We have to push back again, right? If we just accept this, who knows what we have to just start accepting on into the future. It's not okay. It's really not. So anyways, kudos to people who are pushing back against it. Yeah, it's important.
Yes.
Important concept, definitely. Yeah, and I have people call me all the time from, all over the country saying what's going on and, my doctor won't help me. And
Yes. Well, I so appreciate your boldness and your courage and your passion to not just help your patients and provide true patient-centered, thoughtful care, but also to just push back against these government narratives and these oppressive policies by the state boards. So thank you. Do you have any final words or words of hope, or where people could find your Substack, or even if they want to seek out your care?
Sure. Well, so my Substack is drturner.substack.com. And then my website is michaelturnermd.com. And welcome to dialogue with people through either of those channels. Glad to do it. Yeah, actually, I do want to end on a note of positivity, and not without warrant. There's a lot of positive news here. And I think, first of all, as far as the vaccine, it's sort of like entropy, right? It's one directional. In other words, as more information comes out, as more time goes on, as more people are injured, as more corruption is unveiled, there's just a one directional move from being pro-vaccine to maybe I'm struggling to now being staunchly anti-vaccine. Nobody ever goes the other direction, okay? So time and information is on our side, and that's just proof. My case is proof, and I could thousands and tens of thousands of other people. So it's an inexorable one-way directional move towards seeing these things for what they are. So that's positive. And also the COVID and the vaccines, they brought up an awareness of larger issues of corruption within our government, collusion between pharma, FDA, et cetera, that needed to be exposed, just never had an occasion to be. So it cast a pretty glaring light on that at this point, and that's good, right? That's become a national object of discussion. Hopefully somebody can sort that out at these different levels, but that's very much needed. And I think also, to your point, it's even invoked and cast a light on a larger question of all the vaccines. What's up with all of these vaccines? This is not my expertise to comment them on, frankly. I don't know. It's an open question in my mind. I haven't read the book Turtles all the way down. People talk about it. Maybe all the vaccines are without merit. Maybe, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and you need to be a little selective. I'm not sure. But it sure has cast open the door to really reconsider all of those, which is probably a good thing, probably way overdue. And it's also put us on alert for future vaccines that they want to roll out, right? Anything that involves lipid nanoparticles, I'm not up for it, right? Those things are toxic. Anything that involves mRNA fragments, not up for it. It might sound new and fancy, but I'll just take an old vaccine if indeed the vaccine, it turns out to really be necessary. So we've moved forward, a couple, truly huge incremental steps here in the dialogue and in our knowledge of what's going on.
I agree with you. There were definitely some silver linings to the COVID response, and one being this massive light being shined on just how much undue influence big pharma has in almost every aspect of our lives. And I agree, to your point, this was a moment in this medical liberty movement that we won't get back, and we are going to capitalize on the momentum of, hey, these people may not necessarily have your best interest in mind, and governments certainly don't need to collude to remove your informed consent.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, keep up the fight, stay in it. We're staying positive. We're doing every day's work every day, and trusting that larger forces are at work in a good way. God's at work. People of goodwill are at work. Light's being shown on this thing, and progress is happening.
Yes and amen. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Turner. I'll see you in a couple of weeks for my next appointment, and blessings to you.
Thank you. Great to talk with you and all the people out there in Texas. Love you all. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to the Shot Callers podcast. Please, if you found value in this content, rate us and share the podcast with a friend. It's a great way to get the message out and to empower everyone to make informed decisions. Until next time, never forget, we are the Shot Callers.